So bottom line here is that most networks have at least partial deployment of IPv6, which means that maybe that connectivity, that the systems in your network do not really have, let's say, global connectivity when it comes to IPv6, but they do have IPv6 support and they do have IPv6 support enabled by default. And one thing that you might do to actually test this is essentially run a sniffer on your network, and you will see that you will find at least some local traffic for v6. A comment that I'd like to make, or some background that I'd like to provide about v6 and v4 is how, let's say, the two protocols interoperate with each other. Because I might have talked a little bit about v6, and you might wonder, well, how these protocols are really incompatible between each other. So let's say, how are they glued together on the internet? So essentially, things work like this. If you have a domain name, which is usually what we use to, let's say, visit the website or whatever, that domain name may map to A records, what are usually called A records, which means IPv4 addresses, and or quad A records, which are v6 addresses. Essentially, if I want to visit, for example, google.com, then that domain name, in the case of Google, actually it maps to the two things, v4 addresses and v6 addresses. The nodes that you have in your network may request for one of the records or the others. That depends on a number of factors. And dependent on another set of factors, they might try to connect using IPv4 or an IPv6. This is a little bit complex, but that's the important idea that you should keep in mind. That means that if you're visiting, let's say, a site, and that site supports both protocols, you might end up using, for example, IPv6. The DNS, to put it in some other way, is what essentially glues the two protocols together. So how can IPv6 be exploited for malicious purposes, if you want? So essentially, as I said before, that v6 support is dormant in your network because most systems have v6 support and it's enabled by default. So essentially, you just need a local system that pretends to be, for example, a local router or a local DHCP version 6 server to actually tell the local nodes to configure an IPv6 address. And that's it. Then another thing that a local node could do is something similar to what can be done for IPv4, which is essentially spoofing DNS responses. So for example, if you were trying to visit www something, and that domain doesn't support v6, if I'm an attacker on the local network, I can essentially spoof the DNS response, and I respond with a quad A record, an IPv6 address, so that instead of trying, the v4 address, you try the v6 address. The implications of that is that an attacker can perform, for example, man-in-the-middle attacks, but it can actually perform any kind of attack that is based on redirecting the traffic to somewhere else. One thing that is interesting is that it's very likely that you have in your network before security controls, whether those are IDSs or firewalls or whatever, but you don't have v6 security controls. So if an attacker, for example, is able to trigger that v6 connectivity, that might mean that by just using v6 connectivity, he's evading, or he's actually causing your own systems to evade your v4 security controls. How can you possibly mitigate v6 implications? So one of the most obvious responses to that is that you should deploy v6 security controls. And what are those controls? Well, the same thing that you deploy for v4. Okay? If you are deploying an IDS on v4, you should do the same thing on v6. If you have a firewall on IPv4, you should have a firewall on IPv6, and so on. The problem with that is that as I discussed yesterday, usually you don't have parity of features when it comes to security devices. So maybe you have this firewall that can do all this fancy stuff on v4, but it cannot do the same stuff on v6. It might also mean that, let's say, you have all these devices that you purchased like a couple of years ago, and those devices don't even support v6. So there are trade-offs, and it's not that simple to actually enforce v6 security controls. Another thing that you can do, which I'm not saying is the best possible outcome, but it's something that is doable, is to filter the v6 traffic. So if you're not able, for example, if you don't have an IDS that supports v6, or you don't have a firewall that supports IPv6, then you might be able to filter this traffic to prevent v6 traffic altogether. So what are different ways to do that? One way is to, for example, filter IPv6 traffic at layer 2, which is one of the best possible options if you are going the filtering role, because essentially that means that at the layer 2 switch, you are already filtering all the IPv6 packets, but you should also think about tunnels, because there are all these these transition technologies such as Tirido, 624, and many others that ship with operating systems such as Windows. So it's not just about filtering native IPv6 traffic, but also about filtering transition technologies. What I think it's important, no matter what the outcome is that you make an explicit decision on this. So the problem basically is that in most organizations, they don't even think about the V6 implications on IPv4 networks. So I'm not arguing whether the best possible outcome is to enforce the V6 security controls or the filtering stuff, but what I'm saying is that one way or another, we should make a decision, an explicit decision on the topic. And then this is one that that's why I call it the good, the bad, and the ugly, because it's, let's say that you have everything controlled in your network. Let's say that you're filtering, V6 tunnels, and you're filtering native traffic at layer 2, and so on. One of the problems that can arise as a result of IPv6 is what is usually referred to as VPN traffic leakages, which is another way to say that you supposedly have traffic that goes on a VPN tunnel, which is secure, but all out of the sudden it goes outside of the VPN tunnel. So let's think about a typical scenario. Let's say that you attend a security conference, right, like this one. One thing you typically do is you assume the network to be insecure. And usually if you go to a security conference, you should probably, assume that. Then the second thing that you do is you say, okay, I'm a security person, so in order to protect all my traffic, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a tunnel with my home office or whatever, so that I can make sure that all traffic goes through the VPN tunnel. Usually it's not safe to assume even that sites use, let's say, SSL DLS. There are many sites that do a very good job about that. I'm not going to name names, but there are many sites that use SSL DSL, and you click on links, and all out of the sudden you are taking out of HTTPS. So that's not the safe assumption. So you establish a VPN tunnel, so you think that all your traffic is secure, but then maybe you don't even realize about that. Your VPN software doesn't actually support IPv6. So it only knows about IPv4 traffic, not about IPv6. So what can happen? An attacker can trigger V6 connectivity on the local network, simple, just fire a couple of packets on the local network, no big deal about that. And now, all out of a sudden, all of the nodes, if he, for example, also spoofs DNS responses, now all out of a sudden, all domain names become dual stack. They support V4 and they support V6. Now, if your laptop, for example, employs V6 to connect to those sites, then and your VPN software doesn't know anything about IPv6, all your traffic is going to go over V6 on the clear on the local network, okay? Which means that your VPN software is going to be entirely ignored. This can be the result of, let's say, an active attack, but it can also be the result of, let's say, just legitimate V6 connectivity. Just to give you an example, ITF meetings, which is the Standards Organization for Internet Technology, they all support IPv6. So if you go with your laptop to an ITF meeting, which supports V4 and V6, you are certainly going to get V6 connectivity. And if you are visiting, for example, let's say Google, Facebook, or whatever of those sites that are dual stack, support V4 and V6, you are very likely going to use V6, and all of your traffic is going to go on the clear. Just try a sniffer, and it's as simple and as bad as that. So your traffic goes on the clear with you assuming that your traffic was actually being secure. Unfortunately, many of the VPN software out there doesn't support IPv6 at all. So the situation is not really that nice. As a kind of mitigation for this stuff, which I'm not saying is the nice way to go, there are not that many options. So what I personally do is when I'm connected to what I assume to be an insecure network, I disable V6 support altogether on my system, which means that my system cannot even configure an IPv6 address, so I can make sure that if traffic is sent from my laptop, it goes on the VPN tunnel. Okay, so that's essentially there is, if you drop me an email, that I have my email address later in the slide, there's a document that we author, an IETF document on this topic, which has many more details about this stuff, but the idea was to give you the high order bit on the V6 implications on what are supposed IPv4 only nets. Before finishing the presentation, this language is working awfully. I'd like to thank Priyanka and Vikash and Devesh, which did a lot of effort like behind the scenes for me to be able to be at this event. From getting the visa for India and dealing with some issues with my tickets that were canceled and blah blah blah. I'm really thankful for that. And also thank you for being at this presentation. Feel free either in the corridor or by email to drop me any questions or comments that you might have. Thank you.
Use that to your IPv6 connectivity, but ISP does not support IPv6 and it just assigns to a dynamic IPv4 address. Which will be IPv6?
No, well, in that case you will only have IPv6 addresses that can be used on the local link. In that case you wouldn't have a problem, but what we are assuming for the VPN case that I was describing is that you are using the VPN, for example, on a public network, such as this one. So let's say that you attend this conference, you connect to the Hyatt Wi-Fi network. Now, even if they are not providing V6 connectivity, me as an attacker, I can fake V6 connectivity. And now when you are visiting sites that are dual stack, then in many cases you will prefer the IPv6 connectivity. I can actually force your laptop to use V6 as opposed to V4.
Okay. Even if the ISP does not support.
Well, in this case, the thing is that one scenario is that in which you are at home with your ISP and let's say your Wi-Fi network, if you want, is closed. So that's one thing. But here, for example, when you are connected to a public network, whether it's a cyber cafe or whatever, then you can have a local attacker that is spoofing those packets. So whether it's your ISP that is providing the V6 connectivity or a local attacker, you cannot really tell. You know what I mean?
When IPF, in 2002 documentation, IPv4 to IPv6 migration plan has been put into place, and the IEEE has given 16 recommendations. One of the recommendations was that when the machines will come, which will be both ready, networking machines, whether it is a IPv4 as well as IPv6 ready, there are means of blocking at iOS level. They have also provisioned that you can block it at the hardware level. So there are pins which have been given in all the CISO device or networking device, where on hardware level we can block the conversion IPv6 till you are fully compliant and you want the traffic to go from IPv4 to IPv6. And that way you can control the traffic directly at the hardware level. Unfortunately, most of them are coming by default enabled for both, and you end up missing the component IPv6 which is already there, even though you don't want the traffic to be converted.
One comment I would like to make is that one of the reasons for which in one of the slides I mentioned that if you're going to filter V6 traffic, it's probably better if you try to do it at layer 2, that is at the switch level below the internet layer, is because it's widely known that some products that have been shipped by big vendors, Cisco is one example, they can be trivially evaded. Okay, so it's much better if you can to do the filtering at layer 2, which means that your network interface card does not even get it. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Thank you so much.